Today we're going to introduce two different ways to cook thick pork chop. It's super easy and the result is so tasty. It's so tender and juicy and has so much flavor. If you've never cooked thick pork chops before, we highly recommend you try it. It's as good as an expensive steak, but for a fraction of the price. Before we start, we're going to add all of the seasoning into a bowl. We use 2 tablespoons of cajun seasoning, 2 teaspoons of garlic powder, 2 teaspoons of onion powder, 1 teaspoon of cayenne pepper, 1 teaspoon of sugar, 1 teaspoon of black pepper, and a half teaspoon of salt, and we mixed it well. You don't have to really follow us, you can just do kind of your own seasoning here, whatever you prefer. This kind of thick pork chop is called a cowboy pork chop. We bought it at Sam's. It's with the bone in. It's about 1.5 inches thick. We got it for about $2.50 a pound, like $4 each piece. It's a cheap meat cut, but it gives nearly the same satisfaction as eating an expensive steak. We're going to add seasoning on each side of the pork chop. You can cook it right away, but we prefer to let it season for about 30 minutes before cooking. In this video, we're going to show you 2 different ways to cook this kind of pork chop. First, cook in the oven. Preheat the oven to 400 degrees. Sear both sides in a cast iron pan for 5 minutes. Make sure to get the sides as well. After searing both the sides, we're going to send the pan into the oven. For your reference, our pork chop is 1.5 inches. It needed about 15 minutes to cook. Adjust the cooking time according to how thick your pork chop is. 15 minutes later, stick your meat thermometer into the pork and read the number. We're looking for 145. As the pork chop has a lot of lean parts, one of the biggest challenges in cooking the pork chop is to not make it overcooked and dry it out. So using a meat thermometer allows us to tell if the pork chop is cooked or not. So right as we cook it to the recommended temperature, we're going to stop. So we have no chance of overcooking. So using a meat thermometer allows us to make sure that it's right on the edge of being cooked. It's freshly cooked, it's not overcooked. The recommended temperature for pork is 145 degrees Fahrenheit. This is recommended by the National Pork Board. Once we're at 145, let it rest for 10 minutes, just like a steak, and then it's ready to eat. Let's cut it open and take a look. The meat is perfect, so tender and juicy. While we like to cook pork chops in the oven, we prefer to grill them. I think grilling the pork chops gives you a much better flavor. So, the second step we're going to show you is to grill the pork chop. We have tested 2 different ways to grill it. The first one is to heat the grill to about 350 degrees, place the pork chop directly on the grill for 8 minutes, and close the grill.
Say 350.
8 minutes later, brush some oil, and flip to the other side for another 8 minutes. The pork chops look so good. There are beautiful grill marks on it, but the other one is a little bit burnt. But it's okay. The downside to this method is it's easy to burn the outside while the inside is still raw. I don't mind the burnt part, it adds some flavor. My wife cares. You repeat this process until the internal temperature is 145. In about 3 minutes, we check the meat again. 145, now it's time! Let's take a look inside. Despite it is slightly burnt on the outside, the inside is very tender and juicy. Our first grill is a success, but we want to introduce an easier and better way to grill. Preheat the grill to 400 degrees. So season the pork chops just like you did earlier. Use foil to wrap the pork chop, just like wrapping a gift. Once the pork chops are wrapped, directly toss them onto the grill. So while the pork chop is cooking, the foil will prevent the outside from being charred. We're going to grill for 5 minutes and then flip to the other side for another 5 minutes. Then open the foil and brush some oil and grill each side of the steak for an additional 5 minutes on each side. The actual cooking time depends on how big the pork chops are. We're looking for 145 degrees internally. Then use a meat thermometer to check the temperature. Once it has achieved 145 degrees, it's ready. While waiting for the pork chop to rest, we can use this time to prepare some sides. I like to have my pork chops with a simple salad plus lemon olive oil dressing. We have introduced this salad dressing before in our grilled chicken sandwich video. If you're interested, click on the top right corner to watch. It is very fresh and a nice pairing for a summer barbecue. Let's take a look at the pork chop. I prefer the second one. Using the foil did make it juicier on the inside and less charred. Thick pork chops are way better than thin pork chops. You're looking for thickness, you grill it like a steak, turns out wonderful. It doesn't need complicated steps, but it can be super delicious. Voila! That's 2 ways to cook thick pork chops. Thanks for watching. Hope you like and subscribe. Click the bell button so you can know when we update in the future.
Say it again.
Sear both sides in a cast iron pan. Oh my god. Preheat the oven at 400 degrees. What do you want from me?
Happy bear.
Preheat the oven 400 degrees. 15 minutes later, stick your meat thermometer into the 15 minutes later, stick your meat thermometer. Let's take a look at the pork chop. I prefer the second one. Using the foil. Hey, I don't prefer the second one.
You said it.
Let's take a look at the pork chop. I don't really prefer the second one, but my wife does.